Yesterday, 4 of these extraordinary Americans were killed in an attack on our diplomatic post in Benghazi. As Americans, let us never, ever forget that our freedom is only sustained because there are people who are willing to fight for it, to stand up for it, and in some cases, lay down their lives for it.
They didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again. It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Everyone is scared to death of Donald Trump because Donald Trump plays chess in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He has now checkmated all of his potential opponents, his competitors.
Tonight, we have 3 whistleblowers from Benghazi here on the show to tell us their side of the story about what happened that night and what could have been done and how the official story doesn't add up. So you guys are going to want to stick around and check it out. Welcome to another episode of Just Informed Talk. I'm your host, Craig. Today, we are joined by 3 incredible men who have come forward to talk about the events of September 11, 2012 and what happened in Benghazi with regard to the attack on the U.S. Embassy there. We are joined by retired Army Sergeant First Class William Kotel, former Air Force AOC Specialist from AFRICOM Nick No, and former Air Force AOC Specialist Josh Salmon. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Now, I want to jump right into this and just talk about what each of your individual roles were surrounding the command structure and the events that took place on September 11, 2012 in Benghazi.
My job was the non-commissioned officer in charge of the early warnings and indications floor, or the watch floor, at CENTCOM.
My responsibilities in the AFRICOM AOC were combat reports within the combat operations floor there. And my job was to keep track of all of the assets, so where they were at any given time, so that a general officer would have that information.
Sure. Overall, I was an intelligence analyst for I was a member of the Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance Division, specifically working the watch desk for the AOC at that time. So we were farmed out essentially to the combat ops floor as the ISRD representatives worked in a place called the Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance Cell. It was essentially a compartmented area on the ops floor.
Okay. So obviously, each of you individual gentlemen had a very unique perspective for the events that took place that day. And obviously, you all were there when this all happened. The timeline itself is very important to understanding what happened that day. And with that in mind, I want to go into this next question. So for each of you individually, can kind of walk us through, when did you all figure out that, you know, Ambassador Stevens had went and activated his personal distress button and was calling for, you know, help, and indicating that the embassy was being overrun by attackers? Could you go ahead and start there, Sergeant Kotel?
Yes. The first thing I'd like to do is just back it up for 1 minute so everybody understands what my role was. When I was dealing with the watch floor at CENTCOM, we were also tasked to support AFRICOM. At that time, AFRICOM didn't have a formal command structure set up. So we were doing all their intelligence works. We were also doing intelligence for NATO for 5 months prior to the attacks. And as far as your question goes, when you lead up to the date of the attack, we knew in less than 30 minutes that there was an attack happening at the annex in Benghazi, Libya, because the actual embassy itself is in Tripoli. So we started to try to formulate what was happening and ascertain. That evening at CENTCOM, we were involved with a training exercise called Internal Look 12. And we were told to not deal with that because the training exercise is what we had to focus on. We were told State Department had things that were going on. Simultaneously, when that attack occurred in Benghazi, Libya, our embassy in Cairo, Egypt, was also overrun by about 2,500 local nationals, according to reports we read. And we were not allowed to engage with that. We were told the State Department was giving the Morsi government the opportunity to regain control in Cairo, Egypt. And in Benghazi, we were told that the State Department had things in hand. Throughout the night, we were not allowed to stop this training exercise whatsoever. And we had all the intelligence information. We had the human intelligence, the signals intelligence, the MASIN. We also had further intelligence from our NATO allies. And in addition to that, we also had what's called the GEEK system, Global Command and Control System, which deals with where friendly and enemy assets are and where neutrals are. So we had all of that available. We had assets available to send, and we were not allowed to do that from CENTCOM. And for the rest of the stuff, I'll let Nick know, go ahead and speak, and then Josh talk about their perspectives.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello,
Nick.
this is Nick. Hello. So whenever this was all happening, as Sergeant Cotel said, we were very new. We had merged AFRICOM and EUCOM together into the 603rd Air and Space Operations Center. And at the time of the attacks there, my job, as I said before, was to know where all the assets were. We had assets from EUCOM and AFRICOM at our disposal. And one of the issues that I had with everything that happened was that we had a rescue team that was available, a pararescue team that is an Air Force Special Forces unit. And their job is exactly for these situations to fly in, parachute in, and then set up a perimeter and or rescue the people there. All right, so we had them at our disposal, and they were ready to go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if there's any sort of issue, we would have known about that right away, and everything was good to go. So there's no reason that they could not have been used. We also had assets. We had fighter jets in Aviano. We had fighter jets in Lakenheath. And according to the timeline, as you, I'm sure, know, and your listeners know, there was plenty of time to get those jets up in the air and over there. And also, we had tankers everywhere. They were always flying missions, and we could have just diverted them for those people as well. And then on top of those assets, we also had access to RPAs, or drones is the term most people might know. And we had them littered over Africa, and especially Northern Africa. And especially around that area, we had drones that were armed and unarmed. And so if anybody tried to make the excuse that there's nothing that could have been done from our remotely piloted aircraft, that's not true. And on top of that, we had other assets as well. Typically, there would be a Navy asset sitting out there in the Med, and that's another story too.
So, I mean, interestingly enough, when you read through the official timeline that's provided by the Pentagon, there is kind of this. It feels like they're saying that there was only 2 Marine fast teams that were in Spain who were able to respond, who were activated for this. But it sounds like to me, from what you're saying, there was a whole lot of other assets that could have been deployed immediately. I mean, that seems to be the what I'm getting from this.
That's correct.
Hey, Josh, excuse me 1 second, Josh.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't you explain what you were seeing from your perspective while the attacks were going on, like in the initial attack phase?
Okay, so initially, how it works up in the watch desk area, we got 2 representatives from the ISRD. One is generally tracking all the flights that are going on at the time, will be going on through our subordinate units all over the place throughout EUCOM, AFRICOM, and the other one is basically keeping up on all of the what they call MERC traffic. It's essentially a whole lot of chat rooms of current intelligence information coming through on both of our areas of operation or areas of responsibility. And we hadn't been briefed, myself and my counterpart, now I don't know if it was a day off type of thing or just hadn't gotten an email for it. But anyway, we were caught off guard when the initial, when it initially started happening, and got a call from one of the entities that we normally work with. Like, we're in constant communication usually with various intelligence outfits from around around UCOM and AFRICOM, doing, conference calls on a daily basis and sharing information. Well, I had received a phone call asking if we were seeing what was going on, and the exact time escapes me. I tried to get a hold of my counterpart, but he's still in, so I don't think he really wants to get into it, or just doesn't remember. But in any event, we hadn't been seeing what was going on, so at that time I tried to get a timeline of all the the events up to that point, of what was going on, to relay to the chief of combat operations, who is technically who we're responsible to, especially on the night shift. Now, normally our ISRD folks are, a typical 8 to 4, 8 to 4:30, so they're not around at night. The night shift's only up at the watch desk. So we relay all the information to the chief of combat ops to make a decision whether to call somebody in, take some sort of action. In addition to relaying the information to our other entities that we worked with around the area, intelligence-wise, U.S. Air Forces Europe, so on and so forth. In addition to our LNOs that are out on the floor that could have made any moves or spoke to whatever higher-ups they needed to. So gathering all the information, my counterpart was still tracking all the flights that were going on, and got a good timeline of events that had taken place, and basically gave the information to the chief of combat ops, and essentially were told that we couldn't do anything from there, so that not to call anybody in. Now, I don't know if that was an experience as a acting CCO at the time, because sometimes you got augmentees in, but regardless, likely should have known, the protocol when you're dealing with, American lives on the line like that. Excuse me. But in any event, we were basically, sitting on our hands, not able to really do anything, but still gave the information to our the LNOs as appropriate. Got the information out there. Now I know that at least these safety folks had called a couple of bird colonels in, and I was on, conference calls with them and various other agencies to, explain the information that I had, in addition to getting further information from the folks that had called us up. Now, the exact agency that called, it escapes me now. I had thought it was Sixth Fleet, but I could be wrong on that. We dealt with a whole slew of them, and it was kind of a busy time at the moment. So in the meantime, we're just kind of sitting on our hands, still monitoring the entire situation. And then in the morning, when the basically chief of ISR comes in with his entourage, we give him a brief over the previous 12 hours of what happened flights-wise, any issues, intelligence-wise, anything going on. So we had the whole spiel to give him on the entire event as it was going on, as I had recorded, and my counterpart had his from, his end of things that evening as well. And our chief of ISR was none too happy in the morning when he came in and realized that nobody had called anybody in. I mean, at the direction of the chief of combat ops at the time. And I'm not necessarily upset with us, but at the situation that a decision wasn't made to call them in. So kind of wondered whether we should have just jumped over the directive not to call anybody, because ultimately when we work for the ISRD, that's our boss. But at night, when we're on the ops floor in that position, it's the chief of combat ops, because our chief of ISR in the morning, when we were briefing him, or when I was briefing him specifically, mentioned that we could have surged assets. Because as Nick said, between AFRICOM and UCOM, just RPAs alone, I mean, we have flights going on all the time, night, day, around the clock. We've got flights that are either, ongoing, going to be going on, stuff that you can bring back and take off again. I mean, there's a multitude of, assets around, and not just the stuff that we brief directly to the floor in the morning as well, but, looking at bed downs from the ISARC itself that we usually get on a daily basis, just it would show all of the assets. Now, whether it was stuff that, directly AFRICOM and UCOM controlled, or, even special operations type stuff that, some stuff we wouldn't even, be showing to the floor on a daily basis. in addition to the tasking orders and the airspace control, it paints a pretty good picture of exactly where it was that we could have searched assets from or taken them off from easy enough.
Wow. So everybody seems to have known this was happening. It doesn't seem like much action was taking place. So, what do you guys think? What do you think? Do you think it's because the information wasn't being moved along that your, chief combat ops, commander didn't make that decision, or do you think it's just it was from the top down?
Let me explain this to you. One thing that Josh may not know about, but we have the commander of any operational group or TOC, a Tactical Operations Center, has a book and it's a manual to go by. When there is a serious incident or a SITREP, a situational report that involves casualties, loss of life, or direct attacks, they trigger what's known as a Commander's Critical Intent Requirement, or CCIR. When that is triggered, everybody is called in because it's that big of an event. So we go by a checklist, just like Ambassador Stevens and the embassy goes by a Department of State checklist for when there's a significant amount of threats. Key personnel like the ambassador and everybody should have been pulled, and additional security should have been provided. So everybody that was involved at the command level would have had to call in their higher bosses automatically. The fact that Josh is telling you that commander chose not to is not a good answer. He's disobeying a lawful order by failing to do that. And at Josh's level, he wasn't able to affect that because he posted it to the commander that was on duty at that time. So I hope that kind of clears up a little bit of the confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so by making that decision, what do you think the motivation was? Just did they not understand the severity of what was happening, or do you think there's like an intentional effort to, to not follow a lawful order and to not pass that information along to the people who could actually affect change?
Honestly,
go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Well,
no, you go right ahead. You give your perspective.
I honestly don't know. I've thought about that, multiple times and tried to look at it from different angles. Like, I don't know if it was his inexperience, or he didn't know, or what to do in that situation. Because a lot of times the night shift guys, it seemed, they had their stuff together, but it was kind of like nothing major really happened that often. So maybe they weren't put in a position where they had to know, once something was triggered, what to go down in a checklist, even though it's kind of an important thing. Maybe it was just an oversight. Like, I try to look at it and give them the benefit of the doubt from a lot of different angles, or whether it was just something that we weren't apprised of as far as calling people in. But it kind of contradicts what our chief of ISR had mentioned from, the leader of our particular division that we were farmed out from, when he came in and was, upset about that one decision was made not to call in basically our direct, higher ups that we worked for, because we were farmed out to the combat ops floor, and that decision was made. So I'm not really, it's hard to, stomach, I guess, that there was a decision directly made to just sit there and not do anything. But I don't know, I'm trying to look at it from a bunch of different angles. I can't really see how the decision just to do nothing, maybe didn't understand the severity, even though the outline that we gave him in the timeline, directly depicted the exact, to the time of events that was going on. So I'm not really sure how he didn't really understand that, there's a serious deal going on at that moment, but, or just didn't know the assets we had available, which seems kind of wild to me, because we were the weapon system, the operations center for the area. So, I'm still not sure what the mindset was there, or where that decision came from, honestly.
Yeah, but keep in mind, Craig, that you have to understand that was one small element, one little command, where multiple commands were aware of this. The Marines had ships right off the coast in that area with assets to move, and they also didn't react either, according to them. At CENTCOM, we were still continuing this training exercise, and a lot of other assets weren't being utilized. We even got requests from NATO allies that were on the ground to assist. We were told the State Department turned those down. So this is not, where Josh and Nick were sitting is one small little command post. It wasn't the main one, but the rest of the world, all through the military channels, was receiving this imagery, was receiving this information about the attacks, and had a lot of opportunity to move forward and execute. So
yeah,
I wanted to clarify that.
That's perfect clarification. I guess we'll kind of pivot back to the facts surrounding Benghazi. I have this quote from a senior U.S. defense official, unnamed. Obviously, they always provide these anonymously usually. But they said, quote, "It's not like you dial up the U.S. military and service members go down a fire pole, hop on a fire engine, and go. That's not how our forces work, not from a cold start." Now, this is in regard to the response to Benghazi. Let me ask you, do you agree with that characterization, or do you think that's kind of a misstatement, mischaracterization of the way we were able to respond to that?
That's ridiculous. I don't know who said that, but they must not know much about the military. We could have had forces there on target in 30 minutes or less, and those armed drones could have taken out the mortars while they were firing within the first few minutes. We had the ability to put people on the ground within 30 minutes or less. There is no question about that. There are documents about that. There are facts about that. Without getting into classified material, I could tell you, post emphatically, that we could have had fast mover jets, helicopters, folks on the ground. We could have had Predators and Reapers nailing those mortar positions. So there is absolutely, plus there was a ton of other security that was on the ground in the vicinity of that annex that could have also responded. And we had offers from NATO allies that had troops on the ground that were right there offering their assistance. So, I don't know who the fire pole guy is, but that's the wrong answer.
I think that's a very interesting take on it, and I tend to agree with you. Now, so could we talk about, though, were we aware of the threat of the attack? Did we have the previous knowledge? I mean, we know that Ambassador Stevens made a request for a higher security detail. Can you speak to that? Like, did we know about this terrorist organization, the group that was there? Did we know about possibly them planning an attack? I mean, is any of that stuff we can talk about?
Yes. And for 5 months, like I said, my guys on the watch floor were doing intelligence for AFRICOM and for NATO. And we did see many, many, many reports for that 5-month period, both from human intelligence and from signals intelligence that came in that warned of threats. Some of them were extremely credible. And that goes back to the Department of State checklist for the ambassador. When the regional security office or the RSO from the embassy gets that checklist and says, we have a significant threat against the ambassador and key personnel that are U.S. personnel, they are to be removed from that area or that country. And security is supposed to be increased. In this case, security was decreased a week before the attacks while requests were being ferreted to go ahead and get more security in. And the ambassador and key personnel were still on the ground with less security. These threats were very significant. I mean, they ticked the box that said they should have been removed 2 months prior to the attacks, let alone a week before. And that was all being pushed and pulled forward to everybody, AFRICOM, to NATO, to the Department of State and the embassy folks. All of those people were communicating back and forth with us on all this intelligence data.
I was going to say, is there anything that Nick or Josh could add to that?
At least from my perspective, Will pretty much had that all covered, because I know at least from our end, sitting the watch desk that night, it caught us off guard. And I don't know, like downstairs is more of our longer term analysis where they might have gotten, if there was any warning to come down, warning orders or intelligence coming in too, that, based on our schedule that we may have, not seen. Usually we get briefed about, or at least an email or passed on a changeover. We hadn't received anything. So Will's definitely got the most accurate on that, because we hadn't heard anything. Most of the folks that we were calling, at least in the UCOM and what we had for, AFRICOM, for the folks that we dealt with on a daily basis, didn't really seem to be in the know of what was going on. So we were kind of scrambling to get all that information together. So from my perspective, it caught myself and my counterpart off guard. Now I can't speak to the folks downstairs, whether or not there was like a snafu or a ball drop somewhere that we just didn't have the info. But it was out there. But to us, no, it was a bit of a surprise.
I've got to say, I got to let you know that I heard after the fact from people who worked downstairs, as Josh described. They were very off-put by everything that happened, and they corroborated what Sergeant Quatel said, but they're secondhand knowledge, so we're going to stick to what I know, and I have nothing else to contribute other than that.
Yeah, secondhand knowledge is tough here because we're trying to get the firsthand stuff, and that's why we're having you guys on. You guys are giving really, really great, in-depth perspectives on what this all means. What do you guys say to this whole push now? I was having this conversation earlier with somebody about the fact that it seems Benghazi's coming back into the picture now, where you have people like Susan Rice going out and saying that it's all it's all about politicizing it, and that there really is no there. What do you guys have to say to that? And I just want to get your opinion, because you guys were involved directly, and I want to hear your take on what is coming out lately.
Well, I'd like to speak on that, but I'd like to back up a little bit so you know the timeline of what Nick, Josh, and myself did separately before we ever knew each other. Back in 2014, I provided a roadmap to the Benghazi committee led by Trey Gowdy to get the facts and the evidence that they needed to put a case up about what happened at Benghazi. And I was flat out denied to provide the information. I even went to the Democratic side and I got laughed at. I went to other congressmen and senators. I went to FBI, Department of Defense, IG. I went to a lot of different places, and nobody cared about the information. The only thing I got back was they didn't want Hillary Clinton elected to office. And that's not acceptable because they didn't use any facts or evidence to support who should have been held accountable and why Benghazi even happened in the first place. Whether the attacks took place or not, there was nobody there to rescue them. We don't leave our people behind. And another point that I have to make is, after that, you have a lot of what I would call story time or fairy tales. And there are people that came out with all kinds of outlandish accusations and uncorroborated, unsubstantiated stories. And, that didn't help the whole Benghazi situation for the fallen families, the Gold Star family members that are left. And it didn't give any closure to anybody, and it held no one accountable. And for example, there is no Iran involved with this. Iran had nothing to do with this attack. Not as far as I know or anyone else knows. Iran had nothing to do with it. And that's one of the stories being proffered out there back then. So if we come to today's date, and to go back to your question, you asked, what is the relevancy of Benghazi now? And the relevancy is that we've been pushing this narrative now for 7 to 8 months on different media venues. All of a sudden, Judicial Watch comes out with hidden emails and hidden information that brings to the forefront more knowledge about what really happened at Benghazi. And you have a lot of retired senior officers that were in the military, you're talking flag officers, generals, and admirals, that were very intent on getting the information out and getting this resolved for the aftermath. Because, during the evening, those that could do something made their attempts, and they were basically shut down. If they weren't shut down, they were threatened, or they were told they would lose rank. And then later on, when we tried to do the right thing and bring it to the forefront in 2014 and 15 and even 16, the information was blown off. And now it's 2019, and we're coming back to that because a lot of people can't stomach what's happened. I mean, we don't leave our people behind. It doesn't happen that way. And in this instance, it did. So I kind of hope that sort of answers some of your question. If I missed something, let me know, please.
No, I think that answers it very well. I mean, we're really trying to get down to the truth. And then, like you said, accountability. Those are two important things, because I was having this discussion again earlier with I believe maybe somebody else, but we want this to never happen again. That's a big thing. We don't want this failure in the command structure, whatever happened, whoever didn't make the right call and allowed this to happen. It seems like we had every asset capability in the world to stop it, yet it was still allowed to happen. And that's really, for me, why this is important to bring back again here. And then, as to what we were just talking about with everything you were covering, it's good to go back though and talk about this. I know maybe Nick or Josh could also speak on what it's like trying to come forward with this information when you go to Congress and you go to the FBI and they just say, we don't want to do it. We don't want anything to do with it. I mean, how does that feel? What is that like?
I have something to say about that. Right after President Trump was elected, I knew that at that point it was probably a safe time to come forward with the information. So I chose to go to Susan Brooks on the north side of Indianapolis. That's where, I was staying at the time. And I went up there to her office and I tried to set up a meeting, and they shooed me out of there, and they said, oh, they'll write to her or whatever. And then I called, and then I emailed, and I left information. I said, I have more information about Benghazi. I'd like to tell you about it. Please contact me. And some time went by. It was about 2 weeks later. This is 2017 May time, around the same time when Comey had been fired for trying to start a coup against our president. And so I got a call back from her chief of staff. Her chief of staff told me, initially she said, she told me who she was. And then she said, you understand you're trying to contact us about Benghazi. And I said, yeah. And I corroborated that. And I said, I'd like to tell you more information. I'd like to set up a time to talk to you. And I'd like to talk to you about these things. And then she said to me, that investigation is over, and I'd like to refer you to the Benghazi report. And she recited the URL to the T. She knew it. Either she had it right in front of her written down, or she knew it by heart, and she was prepared for that time to talk to me. And she said it exactly what it was. And then I was sitting at a computer at the time, and I typed it in, and it came up. And she said, there's a report right there and everything. And I was thinking to myself, this is kind of odd. Why is she not asking me how I know what I know and what do I know? And that would be two very important questions where I could tell her where I worked, what I did, and how I know it. And then I would even have to say all the details over the phone. And then, I sounded concerned, and she said, anything in there, you can, all the information is in there. And I try to express to her that I knew more information, and I know that it's not in there because obviously somebody would be held accountable if they had the information, right? And then I didn't say that to her, but that's what I was thinking. And then she, I expressed my concerns that she didn't have all the information. And then she said, well, why don't you call the FBI then? And then, I was taken back by that. I thought, wow, that's really interesting that somebody that was on the Benghazi committee is not wanting the information that I'm trying to provide them. And it's very good information. And from there, I decided, I ended the call shortly thereafter. And then I thought about it for a few nights, and I thought, well, why would this happen? Why is she telling me to call the FBI? And I thought she was trying to call my bluff. And she's trying to, no, not that. She's trying to bluff me and tell me that, what are you going to do about it? Go ahead and call the FBI. And I did. I called the FBI. I eventually came around to it. I got the courage, and I called the FBI. It was probably a week and a half, 2 weeks later. I called the FBI, and I told them, I said, hey, I've got more information about Benghazi. And they said, all right. And they took my name, phone number, all my information that they could look up in Office of Personnel Management. They have access to know where I worked, at the time I worked there, and what I would likely know about it. And I gave them all my information, told them that I wanted to meet them in person to talk to them about it. And they told me, they said, we don't do appointments. You just got to walk in to the FBI field office. And I was like, what? Something was off about this. And at that time, that's after Comey had just been fired for starting a coup, the FBI director, against the president. So I was thinking to myself, okay, so now the FBI is corrupt too. So where are we going with this? You got the Congress, you got the FBI are both corrupt. Who do I even talk to now? So I did not even communicate back with them. But consider this. All they had to do was look my information up and then contact me and set up a meeting. And I would have come in there and given them everything. And they would have known, and they could have held people accountable. Why did that happen? Why they still, this is 2 years later, they still have not even called me.
I just want Josh to have an opportunity to answer that previous question you asked that Nick answered, just for a moment, and then I'll give you my wrap-up speech. Josh?
Oh, yeah. As far as coming forward with any information and whatnot, I guess I never really thought about it at the time. I more went in a different direction on it. I basically suppressed it all. At the time, you talk about it with the people who went through it and dealt with it. But there's always another mission. There's always, the next day you got to get, have your head screwed on straight. So a lot of it was pushing all of that stuff down. I guess I never really inquired or knew, really any avenues to get the information out beyond talking about it with your constituents and stuff like that. So it's just kind of something you carry around for, as long as you do without any real outlet to kind of get it out there or whatnot. So, having the opportunity to, speak about it and get the information out there now with these gentlemen has been, pretty therapeutic because, even though, it happened so long ago, it's just something that you kind of, it's a bit of a weight you just carry around for a long time and just sort of, you can push it down as much as you want, but then, eventually it gets resurrected. And I've had my, own issues with dealing with it and, taking care of that and whatnot. Like a lot of people I'm sure have, but it's nice to finally, have this opportunity and have this outlet to get the information out there. I know it's some years later, but, at least to hold folks accountable and to get some closure and, to finally, put this thing to bed a little bit, so to speak, and get the real, the real truth out there of what happened. So, it's good on a lot of fronts for sure.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, that's really powerful. We've talked to before about it, and thank you for what you're doing. And it is hard, but it is the right thing to do, and that's really what you just got to focus on. But I'll turn it over to Sergeant Cattell. I don't even think you had a chance to address that question either. What was it like for you coming forward?
Oh my God, it was frustrating. You see people that are in positions of trust, positions of authority that take no action and do nothing. It's very disheartening and it irritates me. It doesn't make me angry though. It's like it makes me kind of sad because when you look at the people to your left and right, just normal everyday people in the military to your left and right, you get this sense of, well, I'm not a congressman, I'm not an FBI guy, I'm not this, I'm not that. What happens if they come after me in that way? And you feel bad for them because it's like they don't have a prayer. If people can get away with allowing Americans to die with not taking the right actions, and they can force a lot of other people to shut up and not do their right duties, what chance does a normal person have? And that's the fear. And you really have to go back on that and say, no, it's no longer a fear. The reality is you got to stand up, and you got to stand up for what's right. And I don't care if it costs you your job or, your livelihood or other things. You're not willing to do the right thing, stuff's going to come back on you at some point. And you're just going to allow that to happen to other people. That's unacceptable. That's not what the Constitution states. That's not what people elect officials for. And that's not what you and I and every one of your listeners are all about. All about truth and fairness, because majority of people that don't have media voices, that don't have ownership of the airwaves, they do regular jobs, regular day jobs that are very important, that are extremely, satisfying to them. And they have a right and an expectation to have the rule of law followed. And that's something that wasn't done here. So it goes from disheartening and saddening and sympathetic to others to outright, outrage. Like, that's ridiculous. How are these people still allowed to be in office or be, in a position of authority? So that's where I kind of get left with that whole sour taste in my mouth. But it never stopped me from going forward no matter what. I just kept going and going and going. Thank God people like Nick and Josh decided to stand up as well. Thank God General Vallely and his crew with Admiral Lyons, who passed away, and others decided to stand up and try, to make a difference and try to make an effort to course correct a lot of government agencies that are going foul.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Bible says, it's righteous indignation, against injustice and evil. And I mean, that's like you said, there are people out there, a lot of people who just don't have the time to focus on all this, but they work hard. They love this country. They're good people on the left, the right, every side of the spectrum, and they're not involved in this crazy, system that has gotten to the point where it seems like we do have a two-tier justice system, and that these kind of things happen routinely, but we can't just treat them as routine. We have to shine a light on them and keep bringing them up. And that's why I'm so glad you guys are coming forward. I'm thankful to each and every one of you for what you've done, both for our country at large, but also for, this particular, event in coming forward with this truth. So let's go ahead and I want to give each of you a chance to kind of wrap it up. If there's anything you want to say or add, please feel free. This would be a good time to do that.
All right. Nick, Josh, do you mind if I start?
Go ahead.
Go for it, Will.
Okay. So what I would request respectfully of everybody listening out there is please go to your computers. Please pull up the Department of Defense IG, the IG of the executive office, and pull up FBI, your congressmen, your senators, and the White House, and please write to them saying this is an important issue. If the President of the United States goes back on this currently right now, he has the opportunity to issue an executive order, which takes 30 seconds, to get the information and to pull some of the people responsible in and charge them accordingly. They violated their oaths, they obeyed unlawful orders, and they violated the office of trust. This will help this current president to remove obstructionists from government that still exists today, and it also gives closure for the Benghazi issue. I believe that this would be a great way to do it. And don't be bashful. Talk to your friends, your church parishioners, people at the grocery store, schools, whatever. Let them know about this, because the truth needs to come out, because it's only a matter of time before each and every one of you can become a target of this garbage that you're seeing before you unfold. And it's so disheartening to just allow that kind of conduct to be moving forward in life. And I thank everybody.
Yes, thank you. Nick?
I have essentially, I'd reinforce what Sergeant Cattell said. If this can happen to the average everyday American, rank and file, it can happen to you. You're next. If you don't say something and do something now, write your congressman, write the FBI, write the DOJ or the DOD, IG, and tell them this is an important issue. If you don't do that, this voice of mine is falling on deaf ears. It's not helping anything. We need all of you, all of you American citizens to stand up and say something about this, because it's not enough for us to just talk about what happened. You have to take action.
Thank you. And finally, Josh.
Actually, I really have nothing else to add. Will and Nick pretty much hit it on the head right there, so I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Well, thank you all three, gentlemen. And let me just say, to reiterate your point, yes, do exactly what they said. Go out there, find however you can get in contact with your local representative. You can go to, I think it's house.gov and all the other senate.gov, and you can get all this information. And you need to reach out to them and tell them that this is unacceptable and that we are going to stand against it. And thank you, gentlemen, so much. God bless you for your service to our country and your bravery and courage coming forward with the truth. I hope you all have a very wonderful rest of your day and evening. And I can't wait. I hope you guys will come back on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.